All right. Everything looks like it's working, I think. All right, I hope everything is working the way I think it's supposed to. That looks pretty good. Cool, I think this is working. Hey, Jack C, how's it going? Hey, this guy. I literally just got started a minute ago, so my plan. This is my first time streaming on YouTube, so my plan here is just to kind of chill and just make some stuff. And if people want to come by and ask questions or just talk about music stuff in general, that's kind of the plan for today at least. But I've streamed before on Twitch, but this is a YouTube experiment for me. So feel free to chime in if you have any questions. But right now I'm just making a little arpeggiator sound. Cool, awesome. Thanks, Jack. Yeah, I'm just kind of screwing around right now. I didn't really have a plan for today. My plan was mostly make sure audio and video works on YouTube, and I think I've got it working. So let me know if it looks weird or sounds weird, but I think it's going kind of the way I want. But I just wanted to make like a cool arpeggiator sound. So Jack, you want to talk about a little bit of parallel compression? Nice, yeah, we can definitely talk a little bit about parallel compression. I'll have to set up some drums or something in just a second. And then this guy, you said, I'll experiment as well. Nice, yeah, so Live has got some really amazing devices in it. I mean, two of my favorites I'm using right here, Echo and the new hybrid reverb in Live 11. These two together just make everything sound really pretty and interesting. But if we're talking about parallel compression, I think probably the best place to get started with that is drums. I think that's probably most likely the situation. What happened to all my collections? These situations where you will be using parallel compression the most. Did my user library get reset? Oh, I bet my hard drive got unplugged. That's what happened. All my packs are gone. All right. We're going to have to just use some straight up. Let's go in here. Use some 808. All right, so parallel compression, there's a lot of different ways to approach parallel compression. We'll do boom, 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 that. All right, so here's a good example. So parallel compression basically means that we're going to have a dry signal that's not going to have any compression on it. It's just going to be the original signal. And then we're going to have, kind of separate to that, we're going to have a compressed signal. And the easy way to do that is to use one of your return tracks. So by default, you start with 2 return tracks, 1 reverb and 1 delay. But you can put any effects you want on these. And you can also have up to, I believe, 12 return tracks. But if you hit Option Command T, you can just make extra return tracks. So I could just take this reverb or delay on my return A and B and delete them and replace it with a compressor, but I'm just going to do it with the extra return track here. And please feel free to chime in. I'm going to try to do it without return tracks. Yeah, you can totally do it without return tracks. I think return tracks work the best for doing it, but it's kind of up to you. There's the easiest way, in my opinion, would be to use an audio effect rack. So if we just grab like an empty audio effect rack, we would have basically 2 chains in here. So here you have your chain area. So right now, 100% of the signal is going to the compressor. But if you right click in here and hit create chain, it makes a brand new empty chain. So this effectively is going to be your dry chain. And this is going to be your compressor chain. And we can basically use the volume controls kind of like a dry wet for each one. So 100% of the signal going through here, if I turn my threshold down, is going to be compressed. And so this is going to be my compressed signal. And then 100% of the signal going through here is just going to be the dry signal. So then we can use these volumes control. If I want more compressed signal, I could turn this up, or I could turn this one down. And I could, if I want more dry signal and less compressed signal, I could basically use this kind of like instead of using your send knob to do your parallel compression. That would be off the top of my head the easiest way to do parallel compression. I mean, technically you can use the dry wet, but I find that's a little harder to get exactly what you want out of it, and doesn't get you quite the same effect as having 2 chains like that within an effect rack. Does that make sense? Hopefully. That way you can do all internally inside of your track. But I personally, I really don't mind using, let me turn my volume down a little bit. You don't need a second compressor for parallel compression. Parallel compression basically means you have one dry, meaning no compressor, and one with a compressor. If you wanted to do multiple layers of compression, you could just create new chains and have multiple in there. I don't know if that's something that people are doing a lot, but generally when I see people doing parallel compression, they're just doing one dry signal and then one compressed signal together. At least that's traditionally how it's been done. Hopefully that makes sense. I haven't heard of people using 2 compressors for parallel compression. I'm sure there are people that do that. That's not, maybe that's the new hot thing that people are doing, but traditionally it's just one dry signal and one compressed signal. Yeah, no worries, Jack. Yeah, we can take a look at hybrid reverb. Give me 1 second. Let me just read this other thing. Let's get to hybrid reverb in 1 second. Anton, you're asking about, excuse me, about impulse. The reason nobody uses impulse is because impulse is kind of like a legacy device. So impulse came first, and it's basically a drum rack where you can only have 8 samples in it. So you can go in here and you can just like load up samples like you could with a drum rack, except for you're just limited in terms of what you can do. Whereas the drum rack, you can have up to 128 sounds built into it, and you can customize all of them, you control all of them, you get like everything you could ever want. So the only reason impulse is really there is that if you were, I don't even know when drum racks came in, live 5 or 6 maybe. If you were opening up a project from like live 4, where there's impulse but there's no drum rack, you can still open an older project using impulse. But really, there's not really anything cool about impulse that you don't get better with the drum rack. There is some there's like a built-in saturator, which is kind of cool, but you can just use a saturator. The only other thing that's actually really interesting is all of these automatically map to the, excuse me, all of these automatically map to the white keys on the piano. This is C, D, E, F, G, etc. And then this last one, the only thing different about this last one is there's a link button right here. And if you hit this one, it's the same thing as using the choke function on a drum rack. So if you play this sound and this sound, they'll mute each other. So if you have like an open hi-hat here and a closed hi-hat here. If you play this one and then play this one, it mutes this one. But other than that, all the rest of these are the same. But that's basically why you don't see people using impulse, is because it is just a strictly worse version of a drum rack, basically. Hopefully that answers your question. I'll get down to the question about Inspired by Nature in just a second. Somebody was asking about hybrid reverb. So this guy, were you talking specifically about getting something out of hybrid reverb using for drums or something like that? Or are you talking about just in general on anything that you want? Because the way I use reverbs is a little different on drums than how I use it on like a chord progression or something like that. But I think the key thing about the hybrid reverb is it's basically two reverbs in one. It's a convolution reverb and an algorithmic reverb. So you kind of have two, and all the stuff on the left side is going to be the convolution reverb, and all the stuff on the right side is going to be the algorithmic. And so sometimes using both at the same time can be a little overwhelming because the decay of the convolution can still trigger a little bit of the algorithm, which is a little weird. So for example, you have this basically a dry wet control here between convolution over here and algorithmic over here. Even if you are at 100% algorithmic, you still get a little bit of the convolution in there. Like this sounds different than this. So watch out for that. So that sometimes that can make it a little tricky to, like, if you're using both of them in serial, you're getting convolution first and then algorithm. If you're doing parallel, they're totally separate from each other, and you basically have like two reverbs at once on one sound. Or you can use just algorithmic or just convolution. Hopefully that makes sense. If you've been using hybrid reverb, you probably know most of that. But that can, to me, it's way easier to learn the plugin by just doing like one thing at a time. So like learning about just convolution, learning all the things there is about convolution, and then learning just algorithm and learning all that, and then mixing the two together and seeing what you can get in terms of like getting something that sounds the way you want it to. But in terms of like getting sounds that I like out of it, let me crank up the line here. One of the cool things about the hybrid reverb, especially in comparison to like the regular live reverb, is you have all these different algorithms, and these change drastically how your reverb behaves. They're all kind of like different ways for your sound to kind of bounce around. So like this is going to have its own set of like qualities to it. Yeah, I've been using like one or the other a lot as well, just to like really kind of dive into it, unless I'm going for like a really over-the-top reverb, and then I'll use them both together. But yeah, all these different algorithms have like different settings here, and most of the settings are the same. So like decay, size, you're going to see a lot. Mod percentage, you're going to see a lot. But as you switch between these, a lot of these settings are going to change, and you're going to get very different reverbs out of it. So depending on what you're going for, and they also like this one, I love the tides. It has this really cool echoey pit, like kind of like panning quality to it. Not for a snare particularly, but like just for interesting sounds. And they all, this one's kind of like sidechain to itself almost. So picking which algorithm you're going to use is going to determine a lot in terms of like what you're going to get out of the hybrid reverb. But in terms of like getting something, you were looking for something quick and tight, if I'm not mistaken. Tight and tasty is what their words used. Just make sure you keep the decay time down. Yeah, shimmer's always the first one I go to just because I love shimmery reverbs, but tides is probably my second favorite. But yeah, if you're going for something kind of tight, make sure you keep your decay time down, because otherwise you get these like big kind of boomy, echoey sounds. If you're trying to do it on something like drums, I find the sweet spot for decay time, especially on like a snare, is somewhere between like 600 milliseconds up to like maybe a little bit under 2 seconds. Anything longer than that, it becomes like way too heavy and noticeable. So you can like, and anything below that is like not quite enough. So making sure you get your decay time kind of in the right area can make a big difference. And then the size control can also make a huge difference. Generally, if the size is really small, it sounds a lot closer in your imaginary space. Whereas if the size is a lot larger, it's going to sound a lot farther away. In this case, it just echoes through the space a whole lot. So make sure you're playing around with those controls a lot to really kind of dial it in. The other thing I do want to mention real quick about hybrid reverb is you have a send control here. This is really different than all of the other reverbs in live. So we can basically have this to control the amount of volume going into your reverb. So if it's down here, we still get a dry signal. So it's kind of like here we have a dry wet control after the effect. So like after the effect is happening. And here we have a dry wet control going into the effect. So if you're trying to like get the right amount, probably between the send control, decay, size, and then the dry wet, those are the things I would probably focus on the most in terms of like getting something kind of like you said, like tight, and getting that like just that right amount of reverb without getting like this big, huge, crazy space that often happens when you're using hybrid reverb. Hopefully that's useful. Hopefully that makes sense. And then Elizabeth was asking about Inspired by Nature, Maxwell Live devices. I'm not sure if those are suite only. I haven't checked. If you are trying to get those devices, the best place to check first is go to your packs, and then here where it says available packs, you should be able to go in and just hit the download button and then hit install. My hard drive got unplugged, so that's why these are all missing. But you should be able to go in here, click the download button, and then once it's done downloading, click the install button. If for whatever reason that doesn't work, you should be able to go to the Ableton website and log into your account, and then scroll down and you should see all the packs you have available. And then you just click on the download button on the website and it should download it to your computer, and then you can install it from there. So I don't know if you're still around, Elizabeth, but that would be what I would recommend checking out if you do not have access to it. I am in Colorado, Jack. I've moved around a bunch, but I'm currently in Colorado. Favorite Max devices? Oh man, so many. Granulator. My hard drive is plugged in. Let me quit live and then reopen it and see if it figures out what's going on here. Just give me a second, because all of my devices should be showing up. Granulator, off the top of my head, is probably one of my favorite devices of all time. No, I might just have to restart my computer to get that to work, or I could just redo this. My packs. Excuse me, my throat's all messed up. I honestly haven't really had a chance to play around with Pitch Loop 89 yet. It's a little, it's like a direct representation of like an old piece of hardware, so I haven't really like dived into it too much. Jack, thanks for showing up. I appreciate it. I'm gonna try to do this live streaming thing more often, so feel free to check in on when I do these. I haven't really figured out when exactly yet, but probably Tuesdays and Thursdays, or Tuesdays and Fridays maybe. Oh, nice, South Africa, sick. I've always wanted to go to South Africa, but I have not had a chance yet. But talking about Maxwell Live devices, granulator. It's still indexing. Granulator is amazing. And then all of the modulator ones, Shaper and LFO, those are just in your core library. The LFO device is just an LFO you can put on anything you want. So if you want to put an LFO on, let's grab another audio effect. Say like the frequency control of the grain delay. You just click on it, adds an LFO there. This is a really common one. Use this one all the time. Also kind of in the same vein, Shaper. It's the exact same thing, except for you can manually add in the shape of your LFO. And if you want to map that, you just click the map button and then map it to literally anything you want. And then you can control the rate like an LFO. So if you are if you use like LFO tool, for example, or any of the LFOs inside of Serum, same basic idea where you can kind of customize your LFO and map it to anything. The bouncy notes, the Inspired by Nature one, I played around with it a little bit. A lot of the new Mac stuff, I haven't really had time to like dive in super deep. And then Envelope Fodder is another one of my favorite Mac devices. This just takes an audio signal and you can map it the same way. All right, let's see if it found granulator yet. Yeah, it's still indexing all my packs because it's going to take a minute. So I'd love to show you more Mac devices, but my computer's still figuring out where they are. Other ones that I use, I've got an oscilloscope that I use all the time, which is really handy for just teaching sound design and learning sound design. So that's probably my... That's because it hasn't found my newsletter yet. So yeah, I just went from masterlive.com and grabbed an oscilloscope. That's really, really useful for just kind of like being able to see your waveform. Let's re-update my user library too while we're at it. There we go. So this as a Maxwell device is not super fancy. Literally all it does is just show you your waveform. Slow it down there. Come on. There we go. So if I'm doing FM synthesis in something like Operator and I want to see what's happening to my waveform as I'm playing with these controls. Oh, weird. Really handy for this kind of thing. So especially if I'm like teaching people how FM synthesis works, being able to see something start off as a sine wave and then shift into other waveforms is really, really handy. Did they change the default device for operator? Crazy. So not a super fancy Max for Live device, but I do really like it because it's handy in a lot of situations. Also, I'm a very like visual learner, so being able to actually see what I'm hearing is really, really handy. Other Max for Live devices that I love. The Euclidean sequencer. This thing is amazing. This works. So if I have this guy going right here, it's just a sequencer that does Euclidean rhythms. So if you hit play, this is just gonna trigger X number of events. And then over X number of steps. So you can change the number of events and the number of steps here, and you can do this 4 times. So you can basically have 4 sequencers in one, which allows you to create really interesting polyrhythmic stuff based on the fly. So if I want to have 5 shakers evenly divided up between every 9 beats, it just automatically does that for you. And then I've got a different shaker here, and this is going to be 3 shakers every 7 beats. And then I could turn this one on here and make this one to be 4 out of every 7. So really, really cool sequencer. I think it was like $5 or $10 to download this. I forget who made it, but if you just search Euclidean sequencer Max for Live, this thing is an absolute beast. I love it for percussion, and there's a lot of fun stuff you can do with it. You can change the direction it goes. You can change what note it plays. You can put in presets. You can rotate your pattern. Really, really amazing. Sorry, I can't read your name because I can't read Russian, but thanks for the comment about liking my content. Appreciate it a lot. Mixing with push. I don't usually use the push for mixing. I'm assuming you're talking about like studio mixing, not DJ mixing. Let me know if you're talking about DJing. Generally, when I'm mixing, I end up using my mouse a lot. Sometimes I'll use the push knobs for like recording automation, if I'm like recording automation, volume up or volume down or things like that. But generally, just based off of my own personal workflow, I don't end up using the push a lot for mixing, just because I only have those 8 knobs, and a lot of times when I'm mixing, I'm like jumping around from like, I'll be mixing my drums a bunch and then jump around to something else, then jump over somewhere else. So I think it's not necessarily a critique on the push. It's more just my personal workflow from mixing tends to be very mouse oriented and not very hardware oriented. Yeah, for on stage, push can do a lot of really cool stuff. But for mixing, I think I use the push the most the first 2 to 3 hours of writing a song. That's where I think it really excels. It's just kind of like sitting down and just making a bunch of stuff. And then once I get to a certain point, once I've kind of developed my ideas enough, I start to shift away from the push and more towards using the mouse. And the longer I work on a song, the more I end up using my mouse, I guess. But I think it could be really cool. I mean, I think the fact that the screen can display the volume of the track if you put it in mix mode gives it a pretty huge advantage over using like another MIDI controller for mixing, if that's the kind of style you want to do it with. But yeah, for mixing, my mix sessions end up just having like too many tracks, too complicated, too many things going on for me to like reliably use the push a lot for mixing. But that's a great question. Do you use hardware or controllers when you're mixing? I'm just curious if that's something you generally do. Nice. Yeah, I think if you had if you had like a special mix rack, my mix rack that I use is really generic. It's like a compressor and an EQ and a utility with no macros on it. That's just all there is to it. But I could totally see if you had like a really nice polished mix rack with all the macros built into it, all set up and ready to go, and that was just kind of your workflow with mixing. I think that could be really cool. I'd never really thought about trying it that way, but I'll definitely consider that. Thanks, Lesbia, for showing up. Like I said, this is the very first time I'm trying this, so if it seems like people are into it, I will definitely try to continue doing this more often. Sorry, this is a little hard to see on my tiny screen here. So mixing and mastering, doing videos on mixing and mastering can be a little tricky because number one, it can be very genre specific, and number two, the person watching it needs to have decent quality audio. I definitely have some mixing and mastering stuff lined up, but that's definitely something where I enjoy teaching that much more in person because I can kind of control the situation I'm in terms of like what I can hear and what the person can hear. As far as other social media goes, I have an Instagram account for Catalyze that I almost never use that I should probably start using more. If you want to check that out, it's just Catalyze Academy on Instagram. And also I made a Facebook account, but I also don't really use that because I don't really like Facebook. So mostly right now, YouTube, and then a little bit of Twitch I'm also going to start dabbling into, although this is way more fun than streaming on Twitch, streaming over here. So we'll see how that goes. Yeah, I feel like one of the things I miss about teaching in person, and the thing I miss from the videos, is that when I'm talking to like just a camera, it's just me talking to a camera. It's a very one-way street. So I like streaming because it becomes this more kind of like two-way dialogue, which is much more fun for me, and probably also more fun for you guys, I hope. So I'm gonna try to keep doing this. Yeah, controllers with motorized faders are pretty dope, especially a lot of the ones that they make that kind of come with Pro Tools. I think that the controller I'm really missing in my life is the Livid DS1. They don't make it anymore, but it basically looks like a little mixer. It's like a little 8-channel mixer. And I know Novation makes the launch control, I think it's called. And I have one of those, and it sucks. It's always breaking. It's always sending MIDI messages when it shouldn't. So having like a really nice, high quality, like MIDI controller that looks and acts like a mixer is something that's really missing in the market. And I'm really hoping that if they ever make like a push 3 or a complement MIDI controller for push, I really hope it has lots of knobs and faders on it. Especially faders. I need a good controller with faders, which would be dope. I feel like that's one of the reasons a lot of people kind of like stick with Pro Tools for mixing, is they get all the fancy motorized faders and controllers that you can like glide everything up and down, and it feels real smooth. All right, all my stuff's starting to come back. These are still not working though. So yeah, I appreciate all you guys coming by and talking and asking questions and making this engaging for me. And then Studio One has a controller mixing thing. Let me check out what that looks like. Oh, the fader port guys, the PreSonus ones. Those are kind of cool. I want something like a little sleeker than that. Those feel like really kind of bulky and weird to me. And then what's the most creative, weird trick or technique I've been using in my music recently? Probably a lot of the hardware I've been using in my setup. I made a video, I think I released it last week, about using modular synthesis as part of mine. XCon faders, I'll look into that. So using a lot of modular synthesis in my productions has probably been the most kind of interesting, weird thing. I don't have it set up today to do on stream, but that's definitely something I'll continue doing and integrating more, is integrating more of like the weird modular hardware stuff with live. But as far as stuff I've been doing like straight up in live, a lot of kind of like randomized sound design, where I'm just kind of like setting up a bunch of effects and synthesizers to respond randomly to MIDI, and just recording a bunch of that and then kind of building things off of that. So for example, if I'm using like operator, and I'll use like, be good. I'll use amp and pedal and like a phaser. So just like start with something really basic. We'll even just do like something like that with a bandpass filter. Start with something basic and then toss on a bunch of effects. Let's move this over here. Cool, something pretty basic. And then using things like the LFO. One of the reasons I really like this LFO is you can put it on random mode. And if you put it on random mode, it's going to jump around. It's going to do this kind of like sample and hold randomization. But if you turn up the smooth control, it'll smooth it out a little bit. And if we change the rate, it'll go a little faster. So now we've got like a kind of speedily moving random LFO, and then mapping this to a bunch of things at the same time. So mapping this to like the bandpass filter, like that as a starting point, and then hitting this button, and then I can map it to something else, like maybe the dry wet on the amp. And then kind of like controlling the minimum and maximum amounts to kind of get them where I want them to be. And then maybe using two different ones just so I can have like a little bit of more randomness. So same thing, randomize it, change the speed, smooth it out, map this one to the center on the phaser. So it's just kind of like setting up random things like this. Maybe we'll add one more effect to make it a little bit more interesting. We'll add, actually, let's do erosion at the end. Just so as you hit it, it'll keep doing random things, and then I'll just resample this to an audio track. Or I'll plug in one note here. That is too high. And we'll make it a little shorter. So just taking something like this and then resampling it to another track. And that way I get all this different kind of like sound design. I'll just let this go for a few minutes as I tweak the settings. So I just do that for a while, and then I get all these guys, and I'll like cherry pick the best ones, and those will be the ones I'll actually use in my song. So just kind of like creating random sounds, creating a bunch of different variations on it, recording a bunch of different variations, and then picking all the best ones, and then kind of taking those ones, so like say taking this one, and maybe the first half of that one, and then that one, and that can be part of my bass line. I was doing that quite a bit recently. In fact, that's probably a video that I'll probably make in the near future. Antoine's saying his weirdest technique is putting a sample at 100% wet reverb and then putting 2 utilities. So just cranking a bunch of reverb tails. That's a really fun thing to do too. I like that quite a bit. So favorite Live 11 device, do you mean specifically the new ones that are only in 11 or just any device that's in Live 11? Because if it's only the new ones, probably hybrid reverb or one of the spectral ones. The 2 spectral ones and hybrid reverb, I think hybrid reverb is number 1, and then the 2 spectral ones are kind of somewhat close behind in terms of the new devices. Actually, the thing I really do like about the new phaser flanger, I really like the old phaser flanger, and then they just added a bunch of features to it. So they took a device that I already really loved. It was like one of my top 4 or 5 favorite devices, and then they just made it better. So this would also put it in the running of one of my favorite new devices. But favorite devices in all of Live, for instruments, it's got to be Operator. You can just do everything with Operator, with Wavetable probably being the second favorite. But as far as audio effects goes, Saturator is an all-time favorite. It just makes everything sound better. Pedal I've been using a lot on all kinds of different sound design, especially the fuzz mode on Pedal. I just think makes everything, not everything, if you're looking for make something grimy, it makes it just sound more grimy, which I like better. And then other than that, Echo I do really love. Those would be probably my all-time favorite devices. Echo, Saturator, Pedal, and then maybe Phaser kind of behind that a little bit. Pipu, I have not used Live Enhancement Suite. I've heard of it, and I know a decent number of people who use it, but I personally never really have gotten into it. Yeah, spectral time on a lot of things can sound really cool. What is the impact device? You mean Impulse? Is that what you're talking about? Because Impulse was one of the ones I was talking about earlier. And then MIDI effects by far arpeggiator, all-time favorite device of any category. Yeah, so Impulse, somebody else was asking about earlier in the stream, but Impulse is basically the legacy version of the drum rack. It was like before there was drum rack, there was Impulse. And it's basically, instead of having 128 samples in a drum rack, you have 8 samples in Impulse. And the drum rack literally does everything 100% better, so there's no real reason to use Impulse. The only reason it's still here is if you opened up a project from a older version of Live, then it'll still work. It'll still load because it still exists. But there's not really any reason to use Impulse over using a drum rack, at least none that I'm aware of. So probably least favorite device in Live. It's either Impulse. What if I have another least favorite device? Probably the dynamic tube is probably my least favorite audio effect. Or cabinet. Those two are probably my two least favorite audio effects. Yeah, a lot of people forget about Impulse because it just doesn't really come up a whole lot. I generally just go for the stock arpeggiator. There are a bunch of really cool Max for Live ones. There's a bunch in the probability pack. If these are working yet. I don't know, these are still not working for me. There's a bunch of cool like sequence arpeggiators in here, but generally I just have used the regular arpeggiator for such a long time. I just know all the settings really well, and I know how to make it sound exactly the way I want. So it's quick and it's easy, and it does most of the things that I want. Although there are a bunch of really cool Max for Live ones out there, but it always takes me a while to like learn a new Max device, and then like to make it sound the way I want it to takes more time. And I think a lot of times when I'm putting together like an arpeggiated sound, I just want it to be quick and easy and like make it work. Is there one in the Max for Live Essentials folder? Again, my packs are all messed up right now. FRL Essentials. Yeah, for some reason my packs are screwed up right now. Well, drum racks in drum racks. So you mean, what do you mean having drum racks in your drum racks? Which you can totally do, but I don't know if I really see the point. You mean having like a multi-sample drum rack where you have like lots of samples in one drum slot? Because there's a couple ways to do that that are actually really cool. Oops. I guess like theoretically you could put a drum rack in a drum rack. That's kind of a weird thing to do. But you can load up multiple samples in a drum rack. Yeah, you can either put instrument racks in there. So if you like, if you have like this kick drum here, and you want to like layer it with this kick drum, if you hold on the command key or alt key, you can load up multiple samples in one drum rack. So you put instrument racks in there. The other thing you can do that people always forget about is sampler can load up multiple samples simultaneously. So if you load up sampler and you hit this button right here, you can take as many drum samples as you want. Let me get back in here. You can take that, put it in there, and take this one, put it in here, and you can have multiple samples inside of a sampler inside of a drum rack and play them like that. And one of the cool things you can do here is you can like divide them up by velocity. So you could have different velocities trigger different samples, or you could turn on the selector and you could like manually choose between different samples. There's a lot of people like Ilgates is big on that, having like one big huge drum rack where you have tons and tons of samples, and you can kind of scroll between them by using this control here, by dividing up your ranges and just being able to go back and forth between different samples that way. And then you could take this, put that in an instrument rack, and then have like multiple instrument racks with different layers of drums on it. There's all kinds of like crazy routings you can do with drum racks that are some are worthwhile and some are just a lot of work for not really getting a lot out of it. But it actually doesn't really let you, it lets you put a drum rack inside of a drum rack, but it doesn't give you extra drum pads in there. Like, doesn't give you all the like cool features. Peppy was asking about my favorite MIDI controller. Push 2, hands down. Push 2 just does everything. It just allows me to write music. I can perform with it. It has all the buttons on it. It has a screen on it. Has the pads are great. Does everything all in one place. The only downside about Push 2 is it's a little bit expensive. But other than that, that's just amazing controller. If I'm not talking about Push 2, probably my MIDI Fighter Twister. This guy right here. It's getting dark in here. This is a great controller because it has 16 knobs. All these knobs are also buttons, and you can also have up to 4 pages of it. So you basically get 64 buttons and 64 knobs in a very small, lightweight thing. So this is one of my favorite controllers, especially for live performance. Does it all really well, really customizable. Great controller. That'd be probably my second choice outside of the Push. But I've used lots of controllers over the years. The Livid Instruments controllers, that company's not around anymore, but all their controllers that they make are pretty high quality, and I like those guys a lot. But yeah. So Antoine, becoming a certified trainer is kind of a pain in the ass. Basically, the way it works is you have to wait for Ableton to host a certification event in your country. So if you lived in Canada, you'd have to wait till them to be certifying in Canada. You couldn't just like come to the US and do their event here. So you have to wait for them to be certifying in your country. You have to first send them a, what was the first round? Like kind of like a cover letter, resume, and I think an example of yourself teaching, like a video of yourself teaching. And generally they're looking for people who are already teaching professionally, who are already kind of like doing that for a living. And then if you get past that first round, you have to do a phone call with them. So you do a call and you kind of talk to them, and that's super stressful. And then if you pass the phone call, you have to fly to wherever they're doing their certification event, which in the US was in LA, at their LA headquarters. So I had to fly to LA, and you do like a weekend long certification event with them that I'm actually like not allowed to talk about because it's top secret. And if you pass all 3 of those rounds, you then become a certified trainer, which was one of the most challenging yet rewarding things I've done in my life. But that's kind of the process. So you have to kind of keep an eye on the website. At the bottom of the Ableton website, there's a page where it says become a certified trainer, and you kind of have to just keep an eye on that for when they have openings for certification events. Hopefully that kind of answers your question. So you want to drag multiple stems, this is Roberto, multiple stems into live? Yeah, absolutely. Super easy, actually. So if you, let me pull up Finder and find some stems. I'll just do it this way. So I don't even know what this is. All right, so here's a bunch of samples, and say you want to have them all on a separate track. If you click and add them in here, it's going to add them all on one track. But if you hold down the Command key, it puts them all on separate tracks and makes new tracks for you. So that's basically it. Really, really easy, actually. People just don't realize that you can do that. So just shift select multiple samples from wherever you're grabbing them from. And like I said, if you don't do anything, it puts them all on one track. Hold down Command key, puts them all on separate tracks, and then names those tracks after the name of the sample. Yeah, really, really easy once you know how to do it. Uh, yeah, it'll either be Alt or Control on a PC. Just try them both, and you'll see they'll shift when you hit them on a PC. Um, Being multilingual is definitely an advantage, but because the way they do the certifications is fairly regional, uh, it probably is not as big of an advantage as it probably could be. Um, but yeah, it definitely doesn't hurt, especially if you live in a place where people speak multiple languages like that. I know, for example, a lot of the certified trainers in Texas, part of what they're looking for is people who speak both Spanish and English because a lot of the population down there speaks both. So if you live in an area where people speak multiple languages, if you lived in like Montreal, for example, and you spoke both French and English, that would definitely be give you an advantage for sure. Yeah, push two is dope. I just love that I can just like jam out on push two and just play chords in scales that I've never used before. Oh, nice, dope. I go up to Montreal pretty much every year in the summer to go camping and out in the woods up there. It's Control for PC. Cool. Almost always, when you are uh, doing something that's Command on Mac and Control on PC, every once in a while, there's like one or two random things I've found that it's Alt instead of Command. I'm not sure why. Maybe it's only one thing. I forget what it was. I was working with somebody who was using PC not too long ago, and there was one thing that the key command was randomly Alt instead of Control. But 99% of the time, Command and Control, same thing. Get rid of all that stuff. Get rid of all these tracks. Still got that guy going there. Is there a good electronic music scene in Montreal? Antoine? I know there's a couple of bands from Montreal that I really like, but I don't know about the electronic music world. I guess is Zora Jones from Montreal, or am I making that up? Let's get rid of that guy. Get rid of that guy. There's a electronic music event in Montreal. Nice. I could see techno being pretty big in Montreal. It feels like a techno kind of city. There's EDM festivals everywhere now. It's crazy how big that's gotten. Let me try turning on a light and see if that makes it a little easier to see me in here. That's a little bit better. I'm impressed with how well YouTube is handling the streaming. This is going much better than it does on Twitch usually. I need to make chat bigger though so I can see it easier. Sweet. Well, does anybody else have any questions or things they want to talk about? Cool. All right. Well, I'm gonna screw around with the arpeggiator for a little bit. Collision, I really like Collision. I don't use it all the time, but I do think it's a really cool device that I think often gets overlooked. So the thing about Collision, honestly, I don't like the new interface for Collision. They updated it so it looks different, but it behaves exactly the same way. So if you know how it works before, it still works the exact same way. But it's a little harder, I think, for people who are brand new. The thing about Collision is that it is a physical modeling device. So it's going to be using, obviously, physical modeling for the synthesis instead of using like a regular oscillator and filters and things like that. So it's still a synthesizer, but you have to think about it in a different way than a synthesizer. Hey, Mike, thanks for popping by. Appreciate it. So the way you gotta think about this is there's two parts. There's the excitator and the resonator. And so basically over here, there's two parts. There's the mallet and there's the noise. So the mallet is the object that you're hitting with, which can be either one of these two or both of them. And then the resonator is the object you're hitting. So if both of your excitators are turned off, it doesn't do anything. So either the mallet needs to be turned on or the noise needs to be turned on. Normally the mallet sounds better, I think, in most situations than the noise, but you can use both at the same time. But if both are turned off, nothing happens. Hey, Mike, I will definitely get into talking about operator. I love talking about operator. I want to talk about collision for a minute, and then somebody was asking about the matrix values, I'm assuming in wavetable, that I also want to get into in just a moment. And then we have our resonators. So resonators are going to be the object that you're hitting. I mean, it's hard to keep up with the chat. You can definitely automate tempo. Pipu. Again, we'll add that to the list in just a moment. So resonators can be objects you're hitting with. So you can choose 7 different resonator types. These all sound different and different qualities. They also have an XY controller in here. We can get a lot of different sounds out of it. And then a lot of these controls are kind of weird in here. Some of them don't do anything, like the bleed control. This doesn't do anything. Some of them do a lot. Really kind of depends on what you're going for. The thing I do want to mention about the resonator that a lot of people don't realize is you have 2 resonators basically the same way you would have 2 oscillators, which is cool because they can have totally different settings. So I could have like a marimba over here and a string over here. But here's the issue. If I turn on 2 resonators and I try playing a note, it's going to sound terrible. You get this very kind of like feedbacky kind of sound. And the reason for that is this structure setting right here. So if the structure is 1 going into 2, that means the mallet hits resonator 1, and then the volume of resonator 1 triggers the volume on resonator 2, which gets you this very kind of like feedback, not very pleasant sound. So if you switch the structure to 1 and 2, you have one imaginary object, our mallet, that's hitting resonator 1 and resonator 2 parallel and simultaneously, which sounds a lot better. So if you're going to be using, this is my like real quick couple-minute tip on collision, is if you're going to use 2 resonators, don't use this structure, use this structure, and then you can tweak the settings here so that they can sound however you want, and then you can get some really cool sounds out of it with very little effort. So that's the big thing about collision. You get 2 resonators. Don't use the structure if you're using 2. If you're only using 1 resonator, the structure doesn't matter. It's not going to change anything. So try that out. Get to know the different types. Also, a lot of these controls down here will change depending on which resonator you're using. So the string is going to have brightness, inharmonics, and ratio. And the pipe is not going to have brightness, has opening and a ratio. So depending on which setting you're using, they're going to have different options down here. So watch out for that. But yeah, collision's really good if you're trying to make a kind of like pseudo-realistic sound. Like you're going for this kind of like pretty bell sound or this marimba sound. Really awesome for that kind of thing. I hope that answered your question about collision. There's a lot more this can do, but I want to make sure I got time to get into everybody's question. But I actually like quite a bit. I think it's one of those devices that you have to do very little work to make it sound good, which is something I like a lot. And let me know if you have more questions about collision. We can definitely dive into it. And then Roberto is asking about matrix values. I'm assuming you mean matrix values in wavetable. That's the only matrix I can think of off the top of my head that would be relevant for understanding matrix values. So the way these work, this is basically an amount control for your modulator. So for example, if you want to put an LFO on your filter frequency, we got filter frequency here. We want this to move up and down with LFO1. So this is going to control the amount that it moves up and down, and this is a percentage. So if I turn this up to 11, it's going to go 11% this way and then 11% that way. If I turn this down to like 1, it's going to move, but just barely in either direction. If I turn this all the way up here, it's moving 47% either way. And the confusing thing about this is a percentage of the entire thing. So basically, if this value is at 50%, this is roughly 50% here. At 50, it's going to go all the way up and all the way down. And you can go above that, but once it gets as high as it goes, that's as far as it'll go. And it'll spend more time at the top and more time at the bottom. You can go into negative values, which means it's going to go down first and then up, but the amount still means the same thing. So every time I hit a note, it moves down first and then up. So that's basically all it's doing here. It's controlling not only which direction it starts going, but also how far it goes in either direction as a percentage of the entire range of values of that parameter. So if we tried the same thing on like a resonator, if I go 27%, it's going up and down 27% in either direction. If I go to here, it goes all the way up and down. So that's all it really does. And then the same thing applies for the envelopes. It's just how far that envelope moves it in either direction. So if I have like an envelope on my filter frequency, if I want this to just subtly move up and down, make this a small number. If I want to go all the way up, higher number. If I want it to go negative values first, put in negative values. Does that make sense in terms of how the matrix works? It's the amount of modulation you're getting. And then there's also a global amount here, which is kind of interesting. So this will control if I have this at 40% and, oops, that's not what I want. If I want this at 50% and wavetable position at like 20%. This controls all of them. The interesting thing about this is that you cannot automate these. There's no way to do that in like a clip or anything like that. It doesn't let you. However, you can automate the global amount. So if you wanted the amount of your LFO to change up or down over time, you can automate this one, but you can't automate these guys. But yeah, that's a good question. Matrix values. And then real quick, if you wanted to adjust tempo over time, the easy way to do that is if you are in the arrangement view, going down to your master, and underneath, number one, make sure your automation is turned on. And then underneath mixer and song tempo, you can automate tempo right down here. So in this case, between bars 10 and bars 17, it's going to change from 120 BPM up to 130 BPM. And then if I just hit play, you actually see the tempo is going to change up here. So you can move that up and down over time. You can also, I haven't tried this out yet, but in the MIDI preferences, this is actually pretty cool. You can make live follow a tempo that you play manually. So if you have like a live drummer and you want live to change tempos with your live drummer, you can set this, you can turn this on, and you can set an audio input on your interface to follow the tempo that you're playing, which is pretty cool. I don't know if you actually are planning on playing something out and then having the song change tempos with it, but you can totally do that. As far as doing it in the session view, there's ways to change the tempos, but not as much over time. So actually, here's the thing. When you are working in the session view, it's still moving through the arrangement view. So if I had a bunch of clips in here and I hit play, and there's automation here, even though I'm still in session view, this is going to be still changing time. So the clips would be speeding up and slowing down as it's playing. So it will still respond. The other thing you can do, this won't allow you to smoothly go from one tempo to another, but over here on your master, actually, let me put it a little lower so you can see it. Hopefully you can see that underneath me. I'll add some new, oops. Wrong key command. Command I is what I'm looking for. So over here, hopefully you can see that the stream is a little bit behind me. There we go. If you double click on, or just click on the master, you can change the tempo here to be something like, I don't know, 125. And then change the tempo here to be 130. That way, if you launch this scene, it goes to tempo of 125. And if you launch this scene, it goes to a tempo of 130. So as you switch from one scene to another, you can change tempos, if that makes sense. So it doesn't smoothly automate. There is a third way to do it, where you could use the IAC driver to change tempos over time with the clip. But I would not, I'm not going to get into it right now because it's kind of in-depth and might be a little bit too much for the purpose of this stream. But if you want to get really fancy with it, yeah, there are other ways to do it. I'm sure there's also probably Max for live devices that will allow you to change tempo from inside a clip. All right, so sorry, Mike, I know you want to get into operator, but operator, I'm just going to go off on for a long time. So I want to make sure I get to other people's questions that are a little shorter. So if you want to sample a song, Roberto was asking, like hip hop style, it's the quickest way to get the sample in tempo with the BPM of the project. So if you're going to be sampling a song, like a whole song, you need to figure out what the original tempo of that song is, which I made a video on if you want to check that out. It's one of the quick tips on the channel. But let me see if I can find a song that I have not warped yet. Not in there. Oops. samples got moved around. Give me 1 second to find a song. All right. Oops. All right, so here's a song. I don't know what the tempo of this song is. I need to figure out what the song is, or find out what the original tempo of the song is. Yeah, so the warp from here can be pretty hit or miss, but if there's a methodology you can follow, it makes it work like 90% of the time. So first thing, in my preferences, under the Record Warp Launch tab, there's this option for Auto Warp Long Samples. I have this turned off, and that way, as I drag in a song like this as a whole song, it doesn't try to add a bunch of warp markers all over the place. So that way, when I turn it on, it's going to take the segment BPM of whatever my current project is. I have no idea whether the song is at 130 BPM or not. So the way you make the warp from here work is you have to find a downbeat. It doesn't need to be the first downbeat, it just needs to be a downbeat. So just taking a look at the song, right in here, probably right on here, there's a downbeat. And so for the most part, I'm looking for just like a really clear kick drum. Oh, this might be copyrighted. I don't want to get copyright struck, but so I'm going to keep this turned down. So probably right in here, I'm going to assume, yeah, there's a kick drum right here. You'll just have to trust me on that. Again, I don't want to get copyrighted for this. So all you want to do is you want to right click and you want to hit set 111 here. This is going to take the 1 of your grid and then line it up with that downbeat. And then you're going to right click again and you're going to hit warp from here straight. So this is going to analyze the space between all your transients with this being a downbeat. So I hit warp from here straight. You can see it changes my segment BPM to be 168.22. If there's a decimal point in there, it's probably either 168 or 169, or I could always half-time that down to be either probably 84 or 85 BPM, really. But that usually works 95% of the time, and we can double check and we can see that like the timing of these transients looks like it should be there. Yeah, so it should be 84 BPM is the tempo of this song. If that didn't make a lot of sense, go ahead and just check out the video on the channel where I basically do the exact same thing, but it's a little bit more in-depth. Yeah, so find a downbeat, right click, hit set 111 here. When you do that, it'll also take your warp marker and move it to wherever that downbeat is. And then you right click again and you hit warp from here straight. Warp from here straight is the good one for doing this kind of thing. And I'd say probably 96% of the time it gets it within a couple decimal points of the correct BPM. This tends to work a lot better with electronic music, things that are kind of quantized and are already kind of on the grid. If it's something like, if you're sampling like an old funk song or like, you know, something recorded pre-1980, it's not nearly as good at it. And that's when you have to go in every like 4 bars or 8 bars and make sure it stays on time. But for electronic music, this works really, really well. Or anything that's quantized. Try it out and let me know if it works. Awesome, thanks Josh. Yeah, the Visi tools are a really cool way to like test the waters with Max, because you don't need to know a lot of Max coding to do really cool stuff with it. Hey Savara, you're asking about the custom visuals. What do you mean insights on it? Like more info about like next steps or where I go from there or that kind of thing? Also, Mike, I have not forgotten about you and talking a little bit about operator. I believe that's what you want to talk about, right? Doing visuals for downtempo songs? Like any specific like techniques for that kind of thing? All right, Mike, I hope you're still there. He was asking a little bit about operator. I'm assuming you just want to know some of kind of like the basics of FM synthesis. Pepe, hopefully I'm saying that right. Thanks for showing up. Appreciate it. So this is the first time I'm doing this on YouTube, so I'm actually really excited that anybody's here. So appreciate all you guys showing up and asking questions and getting involved. Yeah, if you have a little period data, it to me seems much more complicated than Max. So if you know some period data, Max should hopefully be a lot less intimidating. All right, so I'm just going to give a real brief spiel on FM synthesis for Mike, who I hope is still out there somewhere. If not, you can come check out the video later on. The thing you need to know about FM synthesis that really kind of makes everything click is generally when you are doing synthesis, and Svara will definitely come back and talk a little bit more about visuals for downtempo stuff in just a little bit. I'm just trying to make sure I get to everybody. Everybody gets time. So in general, when you are synthesizing a sound, you have an oscillator. The oscillator generates a sound, creates a waveform, right? And if you're using something like wavetable, you might be able to like shift between different oscillator shapes and have multiple oscillators or multiple wavetables happen simultaneously. But when you are doing FM synthesis, instead of having independent oscillators, you're going to be mixing them together, multiplying the signal together, which is kind of a weird concept. You're basically taking, this waveform here is a sine wave, and you're going to multiply it by another waveform. And so the way you do that essentially is by turning up volumes. That's all you really need to do. And for this specific example, I'm going to be using this Max for Live oscilloscope that I had mentioned earlier in the stream. This is really handy so I can see the shape of the waveform. And then I can also see the harmonics. And I'm using just the spectrum analyzer. It's just the live audio effects spectrum. So this will allow me to see which frequencies I'm hearing. And I just hit this triangle to make it big up here. That way I can see everything at the same time. And I think the relationship between frequencies and wave shape is really helpful. So you want to talk specifically about coarse frequencies and the different oscillators? We'll get into coarse frequencies in just a moment. But essentially, if I have one sine wave here, looks like a sine wave, sounds like a sine wave. But as I start to turn the volume up on oscillator B, the shape of oscillator B is going to multiply by the shape of oscillator A, which gets us an entirely new shape. So this is just two sine waves. So one sine wave, and as I turn this up, we're going to see it's going to start adding in harmonics, and it's going to start shifting the shape here, which gets us an entirely new shape with different harmonics in it, right? Then if I take oscillator C and I turn up the volume here, the shape of C is going to multiply B. The result of that is going to multiply A, and then it's going to come out. And usually the more volume you get, the more crazy your shape is, and the more kind of like harsh your sound can be. So we're going to be using these volumes to change the shape of our waveform. So that's basically the idea here, is like each time you turn the volume up on a new oscillator, it's going to change the shape. If you, for example, turn the volume of oscillator down, we don't get anything because this multiplies this, which then multiplies this, which does nothing. So we're kind of going top to bottom here. The other thing that is really useful to know is that when you are making a sound, if we're going to talk about these coarse frequencies here, let me do this. That's me just playing, I think it's an F note right there. There's all these spikes in volume, right? And the way this works is the lowest frequency and highest volume spike, meaning this guy right here, that's the fundamental. That determines the pitch of a sound. All of these other spikes are called the harmonics, and that determines the timbre of a sound. So as we saw before, a sine wave is just purely fundamental. That's all we're hearing. Whereas a saw wave, it's all of the harmonic sequence. And a square wave, it's every other harmonic. So we're going to skip that one, play that one, skip that one, play that one. It's getting a little nerdy, but it really helps to understand what this means, to understand how the coarse frequency works. So the way these harmonics work is you basically take the original frequency and then you add it to itself. So this harmonic is at 90 hertz. The next one is going to be at like 180. The next one is going to be at like 260. Yeah. So you can just keep on adding 90 to itself. Or if it was 100, it'd be 100, 200, 300, 400, and 500, etc. So that's called the harmonic sequence. It's just part of the science of how we hear and understand music. The coarse frequency is a pitch control, but it's a pitch control based on the harmonic sequence. Meaning that if the coarse frequency is set to 1, and I play something at 100 hertz here, that's what we're hearing. But if I shift this up to 2, it moves it up to the next harmonic, meaning the next one we're going to hear up here. If I shift it to 3 or 4. So as you move it up, it's just moving you up in harmonic, which means it gets very, very high very fast, which can be get really annoying. So you have to watch out for that. The other thing to note about the coarse frequency is, like I said, at coarse frequency of 1, it's the actual pitch you're playing. A coarse frequency of 2 is 1 octave higher, because an octave is just, you just take the frequency and you add it to itself. And then after that it goes up the harmonic sequence. If you go down to 0.5, it's going to be 1 octave lower. So between 0.5, 1, and 2, it's an octave control, but as you keep going up, it's going to go up sequentially through the harmonic sequence based off of whatever note you're playing. That's kind of how that works. But what this means is that we can take, in this case, a saw wave, multiply it by a sine wave, and we can start tweaking the coarse frequency here, and we get these like really crazy abrasive sounds really fast. Yeah, hopefully that makes sense. Feel free to chime in if you have questions. But FM synthesis definitely does get a little nerdy. So one of the ways I like to use this, kind of the context for using this, is if we just have, let's just use all sine waves. A sound like this, not super interesting. But if I take this coarse frequency and I turn it up like way high, I get this very kind of like harsh piercing sound. But what I can do is go to my volume envelope and make that change over time. Which gets me this kind of like cool metallic sound. Like that. So you can tweak volume controls to control the amount of oscillator it's going to the next one. And you can use these coarse frequencies to get some like really interesting sounds. So if you're into like scratchy metallic dubstep, that's a great way to do this kind of thing, especially if you combine it with like a filter. A lot of like different styles of house music, especially like bass house or G house or something, use these coarse frequencies to basically get these really kind of, what would be a really harsh sound, and you filter it out to get these cool kind of scratchy metallic bassy kind of sounds. So that's kind of a real brief overview of how you can use kind of these volume controls to get different harmonics and different kind of shapes of your sounds. And then you can like crank these up to get some really extreme sounds. I wouldn't do it on the first one. On the first one, it's just gonna make it really high pitch and not very interesting. But on like the second and third one, or even fourth one, you can get some really cool metallic sounds. Yeah, it's a really straightforward sound design, but a lot of fun stuff you can do with it. And this is just sine waves. If I swapped one of these out for like a square wave or a saw wave, you can like get whole other things going on. In turn, I do kind of wish Operator had a few more operators built into it. FM8 is really kind of what I would go for if I like really needed to do that much. Although I found that like Operator, I can do almost all the synthesis I want with just 4 of them. There's not a whole lot of situations where I find myself with Operator being like, oh man, I wish I had an extra 2 operators. And if there is a situation like that, I'll just use FM8. Hopefully that kind of gives you a little bit to go off. FM synthesis goes a lot deeper than that, but again, for these streams, I'm not sure how deep I'm going to be getting into topics like this. But really fun sound design, doesn't require a lot of work, and you can really kind of go nuts with these coarse frequencies and kind of see where you get with it. Cool. So let me know if there's any other questions about Operator, but I feel like that hopefully gives you some stuff to work off of. So using Visi for slow songs, are you talking about like ambient songs or just songs that are slower? Because I don't know if I would change a whole lot about the Visi patch that I made for something that's just slower. It would just respond. I actually think it would look even better for some slower songs, I think. Let me see if I can pull up that file. Where did I save that? I think this is the right one. Ooh, that looks cool. Sometimes when I open it, it looks really, like way cooler than it does. Like a ballad. Oh, this is not. This is a slightly different one. This is one that has my webcam, so you can actually like see me moving around in there. Hopefully. Oh no, it made me small over there for some reason. Wrong patch. Now I've got to fix my webcam. Give me a second. I screwed everything up. Put me back to normal size. Oh no, now I'm totally screwed everything up. I guess I'm making myself smaller. All right, I'll have to fix that. Oh man, I'm learning a lot about streaming today and technical difficulties. Like about, I think that, how would I make it different for about? Let me see if I can actually find the other Visi. Let's see if this one is the right one. Maybe. Sorry, give me a second. My files are all messed up today. I was not expecting this to happen. Oh, this is one I made with the crossfader. Let's get rid of that. All right, I think this is a slightly different one. Cool. All right. Did I get those working finally? Yeah, there. All right, so here's probably what I would do. I'm assuming if you have an ambient song, you're not going to have like big kind of spikes, but what you can do is there's a gain control on the envelope follower, and that way, as things are slowly moving around, you will still like things will still be able to change by turning this up and making the rise longer and the fall longer, and that way you get this slower kind of arcing motion or movement with it. Yeah, so I think you'd do a similar kind of thing where, at least off the top of my head, you'd still have lows, mids, and highs, but you would turn the gain up on each one of these, and then increase the rise and increase the fall, and that way it's kind of slowly moves and changes over time. That's kind of what I would probably think of doing, and that way it still kind of changes and shifts. And then I would probably just like manually move a lot of the stuff. I'd probably like just with my mouse move stuff around, or just have a really. Here's the other thing I would do, kind of top of my head, is instead of using the envelope follower, just use an LFO and sync it to the grid with a really long rate of like 4 bars, for example. And that way it stays in time with your song. You could even do something like a triangle where it will still reset on time. Actually looks dope. I really like that. But doesn't go too crazy and still shifts with the song you're already using. That would probably be off the top of my head what I would use. Either more gain, more rise and fall in envelope follower, or use an LFO with the tempo sync turned on with a really low rate. And that way it still kind of shifts and does stuff, but it's not necessarily reliant on the audio that's coming through. And if it depends on how ambient you're going for, if you're going for like, or how kind of like minimal you're going for, but as long as the song you're playing is warped, when you're using either the up or down mode, it'll still reset in time with the song. Hopefully that kind of answers your question. That's my initial thoughts on it, but I'll probably need to test it out with some of my own songs and kind of see if I think of anything else to go for it. So Anton, rendering out the videos, there's no way to do that I know of. So I just used OBS to record it and just grabbed audio coming from live into OBS. And I think I'm again, it's my first time streaming on YouTube, so it's an experiment. I'm assuming that I will be able to keep this video on YouTube. That's part of my plan, at least, so you guys can come back and watch it later if you want to. In fact, you're highly encouraged to do so. So I will try my best to make that happen, and I think it should happen as far as the video being available. Yeah, using OBS to record it. The thing you need to do with OBS, especially if there's a lot of motion and movement, is you need to increase your bit rate. So I don't know what your bit rate is currently set up, but I put mine up to like 65,000 in order to get it. The other thing you can do is when you are in here, if you're going to be kind of resampling it, I guess, with OBS, is hit this full screen button. If you hit the full screen button, you won't get your like little stuff at the top of your screen when you're recording. So if you click on that, it'll just be the whole thing. I'm not going to do that because I don't want to screw up my screen. Actually, let's try it. Let's see if this works. Am I still in the corner there? Cool. Yeah, it works. That looks dope. All right, now how do I get it after full screen? I don't know. All right, there we go. Yeah, so full screen mode if you're gonna record it to OBS, but it's kind of a pain in the ass, but it wasn't too much of a pain. Yeah, any other questions about Visi stuff? I feel a little underprepared because my computer's struggling with some stuff right now, but that's probably what I'd do for like an ambient kind of Visi setup is just tempo sync with really long timings. Like 4 bars or 8 bars or something like that. Cool. So this stream went on actually a little bit longer than I thought it was going to. So I'm probably going to call it in just a moment, but I am super stoked that anybody showed up right now. This has been really awesome, really fun for me. I've done streams in the past, and I don't think they've gone this well. So I will most likely make a habit out of streaming. I want to try to do it twice a week, probably Tuesdays and Fridays. I also want to do a song feedback stream where people can submit songs, and then I will listen to them and kind of like we'll talk about them on the stream. So that's something I definitely want to consider in the future. But yeah, keep an eye out for it. Thanks to you guys for having questions and having things for me to talk about. I love it. Otherwise, it's just me sitting here producing, and it's not exciting for you guys. So I really appreciate that. Yeah, and I got another video coming out tomorrow, so check that out. Sometime tomorrow, I guess. Yeah, I'm like thrilled with how well this went, so I really appreciate it, and I will try to make sure this video is available so that if you want to watch it later, you can see all the stuff we talked about. Cool. Sweet. Well, thank you guys, and hopefully I'll see you again soon. Like I said, I might try to do it again on Friday and then try to stick to like a Tuesday, Friday schedule, but it's going to depend a little bit on just everything. I'm also going to try to get this stream set up looking a little nicer. It looks very dark in here. I don't know if you can see me at all. But yeah, I appreciate it. And I will hopefully see you guys soon.